The Apache women saw him naked and thought he was a desert beast. Heat waves shimmered in the distance, making the horizon blur and creating illusions of water that weren't really there. A lone man trudged across this harsh landscape, each step heavy and exhausting. His clothes were torn and caked with dust, sticking to his skin as if the desert itself refused to let them go. He paused often, bending over to catch his breath, feeling the dryness in his throat and the burning of the sun on his exposed face. He had not planned to be here. What had started as a journey to explore the beauty of the desert had turned into a fight for survival. Days ago, he had set off with nothing more than a small pack, some food and water. He had underestimated the desert's cruel silence and its ability to disorient even the most careful traveler. Each dune and rock formation looked the same, and soon he realized he had no idea where he was. The compass he had trusted had slipped from his hands during a sudden gust of wind, and now he had only the sun to guide him. Every step was a struggle. His legs were sore and blistered from walking over the hot sand, and his skin had turned a shade darker from hours under the sun. He was thirsty, his throat dry, his lips cracked, and the small sips of water he had rationed were gone. The desert seemed endless, stretching in every direction without a hint of life or shade. Sometimes, he would stop to rest behind a boulder or in the shadow of a cactus, hoping for some relief, but it was always short-lived. The sun would move, the shade would disappear, and he would be forced to continue. At one point, he stumbled over a small rock hidden in the sand and nearly fell. Dust rose around him as he scrambled to his feet, his heart pounding. He felt his stomach churn from the combination of hunger, exhaustion, and worry. I need water soon," he muttered to himself, his voice hoarse from dehydration. He scanned the horizon, hoping to see an oasis or a stream, but there was nothing. Only sand, rocks, and the distant outline of a few scraggly shrubs that offered no promise of survival. The man knew he had to act quickly. His body was telling him that he couldn't go much further in the heavy clothes he wore. The sun was relentless and the fabric was suffocating him. With a deep, shaky breath, he began to remove the layers he had worn for protection. First, the jacket, then the shirt, then the thick trousers, until he stood almost naked in the glaring sunlight. At first, he felt exposed and vulnerable, but soon he felt the small relief of cool air on his skin. The desert wind, though hot, provided a slight comfort, and he took a moment to regain his strength. He walked slowly, trying to conserve energy, moving only when necessary. Each step was measured. He knew that panicking or running would only make things worse. He reminded himself of the basic rules he had learned in survival guides. Find shade, conserve energy, avoid drinking too much water at once, and keep moving toward a landmark. But the desert had no landmarks. Only the sun's position and the endless waves of sand could guide him. Despite the harshness of the desert, he couldn't help but notice its strange beauty. The way the light bounced off the rocks made them glow like gold, and the patterns of the sand, sculpted by the wind, looked almost like art. Occasionally, he saw a hawk circling high above, its shadow briefly crossing the desert floor, or a lizard darting between rocks. These small signs of life gave him hope, reminders that he was not entirely alone in this vast place. Nightfall, when it finally came, brought some relief from the unbearable heat. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The desert, which had felt so harsh and unyielding during the day, became calm and quiet. The temperature dropped quickly, and the man shivered, realizing that while the sun had been dangerous, it had also provided warmth. He found a small area among the rocks and settled down to rest, using what little clothing he had left as a makeshift blanket. He stared up at the sky, amazed by the countless stars shining brightly in the clear desert night. Even as he rested, sleep was hard to come by. Every sound, the whisper of the wind through the rocks, The distant call of a nocturnal bird kept him alert. He knew the desert could be unforgiving, especially at night. Snakes and other creatures moved silently, and he had to remain cautious. But exhaustion eventually overcame fear, and he drifted into a light sleep, dreaming of water, shade, and the comfort of a safe home. As dawn approached, he woke to the soft, golden light spreading across the desert. He felt stronger than the previous day, but only slightly. His body was still sore, his skin still raw, and his water supply non-existent. He stood and stretched, preparing to continue his journey. The desert was waiting, vast and silent, but he was determined. With careful steps, he began to walk again, following the sun, hoping it would lead him to life rather than death. Little did he know, he was not entirely alone. A small group of women from a nearby Apache settlement had noticed movement in the distance. They had been gathering herbs and tending to daily tasks when something unusual caught their eyes. From where they stood, the figure in the desert looked strange, wild, unfamiliar, and almost like a creature of the sand. He moved in ways that seemed odd, gesturing at nothing, speaking softly to himself. They watched quietly, unsure what they were seeing, their curiosity mixed with caution. The man continued walking, unaware of the eyes upon him. Every step brought him closer to what could be help, or to further misunderstanding. The desert had tested him, stripped him of comforts, and left him exposed. But he was alive. And in this moment of struggle, of exhaustion, and of vulnerability, something unexpected was about to happen. Something that would change the course of his journey and bring him into contact with people who had only ever heard stories of the world beyond their desert home. The sun climbed higher in the sky, its bright rays stretching across the desert and turning the sand into a shimmering sea of gold. The man continued his slow, tiring walk, unaware that he was being watched from a distance. He moved carefully, trying not to stumble over the uneven ground, and occasionally paused to shield his eyes from the glaring sunlight. His skin, already red and sunburned from hours of exposure, glistened with sweat. Each step felt heavier than the last, but he pushed forward, driven by hope that somewhere ahead there might be water, shade, or even help. Far off, hidden among rocky outcrops and desert shrubs, a group of Apache women noticed the lone figure. They had been out early that morning, gathering herbs and checking small traps they had set for food. The desert, which to outsiders seemed empty and lifeless, was full of resources if one knew where to look. The women were skilled in reading the land. They knew which plants could heal, which cacti held water, and where snakes might hide. But this was different. Something about the man made them pause. He did not move like the animals they were used to seeing. His movements were awkward, almost strange, and he seemed unaware of how he appeared in the open desert. From their vantage point, the man looked unusual. His body was bare except for what little clothing he had left, and the dust from the desert clung to his skin and hair. The sun made his hair shine in an almost golden halo, and his hunched posture gave him a strange silhouette. For a moment, they hesitated. Could he be a spirit, a desert creature, or someone from another place entirely? The women exchanged cautious whispers, their eyes wide with curiosity and a touch of fear. They had heard many stories of spirits and strange creatures wandering the desert, and at first glance, this figure fit the tales almost too well. One of the women, the eldest among them, took a step forward, her sharp eyes observing every detail. "Look at him," she whispered softly to the others. "He is not like us. See how he moves. He is not an animal, yet he is not fully like a man we know." Her voice, calm but firm, carried a mixture of curiosity and caution. The younger women, though hesitant, nodded. They understood the unspoken rules of their land: approach carefully, observe first, and only reveal themselves if it is safe. The man, still unaware of being watched, stopped near a small rock formation. He crouched briefly, shielding his eyes, and scanned the horizon. The desert was quiet, almost unnervingly so. No birds sang, No wind rustled the sparse vegetation. Only the soft sound of shifting sand broke the silence. He felt a moment of fear, a prickling in the back of his mind that told him he was not completely alone. But he shook his head, dismissing it as imagination. After all, in a place as vast as this desert, it was easy to feel isolated. From her hiding place, the eldest woman leaned slightly forward. She noticed the sweat on his brow, the way his chest rose and fell with effort, and the slow, careful steps he took. "He is alive," she said quietly, more to herself than to the others. "But he struggles. He is weak from the desert. He needs help." The other women watched closely, their fear mixing with a budding sense of responsibility. Though he appeared strange, perhaps even frightening, they recognized the signs of a human in need. Despite their curiosity, the women were cautious. They stayed hidden, watching for any sudden movements that might suggest danger. They had learned through experience that the desert could be unpredictable, and that even a seemingly harmless stranger could pose a risk if approached too quickly. So they observed silently, noting the man's every gesture. He wiped sweat from his face with the back of his hand, brushed sand from his legs, and occasionally muttered under his breath, though they could not understand his words. Each motion, however, revealed more about him, slowly turning their fear into a complicated mix of curiosity and concern. The man, feeling a bit of relief in the shade of the rocks, decided to rest for a short while. He lowered himself carefully to the sand, settling among the stones where the sun did not reach him directly. His breathing was heavy, and he closed his eyes for a brief moment, hoping to regain some strength. Little did he know that the women were observing his every move. They noticed how he handled himself, how his eyes scanned the area, and even the small sighs of exhaustion he could not control. In that moment, he looked more like a traveler in need than the desert creature they had first imagined. The women whispered among themselves, sharing observations and thoughts. "He has survived long in this desert," one said, her voice soft but filled with admiration. "Not many could last this long without water or shelter." Another added, "See how careful he is. He knows the danger, yet he does not panic. There is wisdom in his movements, even if he seems strange to us." Their initial fear began to fade as they realized that he was human, perhaps lost or abandoned, but still human. Curiosity finally overcame hesitation. One of the younger women, more daring than the others, suggested a small step forward. "We should watch him closer," she said. "Perhaps we can see what he needs. He may not survive the day if we do nothing." The eldest nodded, agreeing, but warned, "Do not reveal yourself yet. Let us understand him first. Only then can we decide how to help." And so they moved slowly, keeping a careful distance, their eyes never leaving the man. The man, unaware of their careful observation, began to shift slightly. He rubbed the back of his neck, thinking about how much longer he could continue. Each step seemed more difficult than the last, his energy waning. He looked around, searching for anything that could sustain him, a cactus, a patch of shade, a hint of water. The desert was silent, offering no answers, yet his determination kept him moving forward. He knew that stopping completely would only put him in greater danger. Meanwhile, the women continued to watch, their minds racing with possibilities. What should they do if he came closer? Could they safely offer water or food? How would he react if he saw them? They considered all options, aware that one wrong move could startle him or make him run. Still, they could not ignore the signs of suffering. The sun climbed higher, and with it, their concern grew. The man looked increasingly exhausted, his movements slower and more deliberate. Each small stumble made their hearts race. Hours passed, and the desert heat became almost unbearable. The man pressed on, unaware of the watchful eyes tracking him. His lips were dry, his skin hot and dusty, and his body ached with every step. Yet he refused to give up. He reminded himself of his goal, to survive. Somewhere beyond the horizon, he believed there must be water, food, or shelter. Somewhere there must be life. And so, despite the overwhelming heat and fatigue, he kept moving, step by step, toward an uncertain future. As the sun began its slow descent, casting long shadows across the sand, the women finally began to see him differently. No longer did he look like a desert creature. Instead, they saw a man in desperate need, struggling against forces much larger than himself. Their fear was replaced with empathy. They knew the desert as they knew themselves, and they understood the toll it could take. This stranger, though strange and foreign, was experiencing the same hardships they had faced and overcome. The eldest woman finally spoke aloud, her voice gentle but firm. "He is human," she said. "He needs help, and it is within our power to give it, but we must be careful. We cannot startle him. We must approach slowly, with kindness and patience." The others nodded, their expressions a mix of determination and cautious hope. For the first time, they began to plan how they might help him without frightening him, how they might bridge the gap between fear and trust. And so, as the sun dipped lower, painting the desert in warm shades of orange and gold, the man continued his journey, completely unaware that his fate was about to change. The women watched, waiting for the right moment to step from the shadows, to offer aid without alarm, to transform a scene of fear and misunderstanding into one of compassion and connection. The desert, vast and silent, held its breath, as if even nature understood the importance of what was about to happen. The sun had begun its slow descent, casting long, golden shadows across the desert. The heat, though less intense than midday, still pressed down on the land, making every movement heavy and deliberate. The man, his skin dusty and sunburned, moved cautiously across the sand. Each step was a careful balance, as though the desert itself might tip beneath him if he was not attentive. Sweat dripped from his forehead, his clothes long since abandoned, leaving him bare to the scorching sunlight. He did not know how long he had been walking, nor did he know if anyone would ever find him. Survival had become the only thought that occupied his mind. From the rocks and shrubs nearby, the Apache women continued to observe him, their eyes fixed on his movements. The fear they had felt when they first saw him had begun to shift into a complicated mix of curiosity, caution, and concern. There was something about the way he moved, slow, careful, almost hesitant, that suggested he was not a threat. Yet they could not ignore the fact that he was unknown, a stranger in a land he had no right to. The desert could be merciless to anyone, and it was only natural that their instincts had been wary. One of the younger women, braver than the rest, leaned forward slightly, trying to get a better view without revealing herself. "He looks strange," she whispered, her voice soft enough that only the others could hear. "But I do not think he is dangerous. Look at him, he struggles. He is weak and lost." The eldest woman nodded, her eyes never leaving the man. She had seen travelers pass through the desert before, some lucky, some not. "Yes," she said quietly, "he is human, and yet there is something about him, something that makes him appear other." The man had stopped for a moment, crouching near a small outcrop of rocks. He wiped his face with his hand, brushing away the sweat and sand, and let out a soft sigh. His stomach rumbled. Hunger and thirst gnawed at him with an insistence that could not be ignored. He had not eaten for hours, and his water supply was long gone. Even the simple act of walking had become a trial, each movement requiring more effort than the last. Yet he pushed forward, reminding himself that stopping completely would be surrender. Survival demanded action, no matter how difficult. As he moved again, he became aware of a subtle sound, the rustle of leaves and the faint shift of rocks. At first, he thought it was just the wind, whispering through the desert. But there was a rhythm to it, something deliberate. His body tensed instinctively and his eyes scanned the area. For a brief moment, panic threatened to overwhelm him. He crouched lower, muscles coiled like springs, unsure of what he might find. The desert had taught him caution, and he followed its lessons now. From their hiding place, the women held their breath. They had not expected him to notice them so soon, but he had. The younger woman whispered, "Do not move too quickly. If he sees us, he may panic." The eldest nodded, signaling for the others to remain calm. They watched as the man's gaze swept over the landscape, finally resting briefly in their direction. Though he did not see them clearly, he sensed that he was not alone. His instincts, sharpened by days of desert survival, told him that others were near. The man stood slowly, brushing sand from his legs, and spoke under his breath. His words were low, almost inaudible, but the tone carried a mix of fear and hope. "Who's there?" he asked softly, his voice strained. "If anyone is there, please." He did not finish. The words caught in his throat, a mix of exhaustion and uncertainty. His hand rested lightly on a nearby rock, steadying himself as his eyes scanned every movement in the distance. The women exchanged glances. They had been debating what to do. Should they approach? Should they wait? The eldest woman finally spoke, her voice calm and measured. "We cannot let him wander alone in the desert. He will not survive the night without help, but we must approach carefully. Slowly so that he does not fear us." The others nodded, understanding the balance they needed to strike, between caution and compassion, fear and assistance. Slowly, one of the women stepped forward, careful to stay low and move with the natural contours of the land. The man froze when he noticed motion, his eyes widening. He instinctively backed up a few steps, unsure of what he was seeing. To him, the movement looked strange, almost unnatural. In the heat of the desert, with sweat and dust coating his body, he appeared less like a man and more like a desert creature. The woman, noticing his hesitation, paused, giving him space to adjust. Her eyes were gentle, her movements deliberate and unthreatening. "Do not be afraid," the eldest woman called softly from a distance, her voice carrying over the sand. "We are here to help." The man's heart raced. He did not understand the language fully, but the tone of her voice was calm, not aggressive. He felt a strange mixture of fear and relief. Could he trust them? Could they help him survive, or were they another danger in this unforgiving land? He stepped closer cautiously, his eyes darting from one figure to another. He noticed the careful distance they maintained, the way they seemed to move with the desert itself rather than against it. Slowly, a realization began to form. Perhaps they were not threats. Perhaps, like him, they understood the desert's cruelty. The tension in his body eased slightly, though his muscles remained ready to flee if needed. The younger woman, seeing his hesitation, took another small step forward, keeping her movements slow and deliberate. She held out her hand, palm open, in a gesture of peace. The man's eyes widened further. He had never seen such a gesture in the desert, and for a moment he wondered if it was another trick, another danger. But something in her calm expression, the gentle tilt of her head, reassured him. Slowly, hesitantly, he extended his own hand toward her, as if testing the waters of trust. The women observed closely, ready to react if he ran or made sudden movements. But he did not. Instead, he lowered his hand slowly, showing that he meant no harm. The desert, which had felt so isolating and hostile just moments before, now seemed to shift. The tension in the air eased slightly, replaced by a quiet curiosity and cautious hope. The man's eyes, once wide with fear, softened. He was beginning to understand that these strangers were different. The eldest woman finally stepped closer, her voice steady and kind. "You are safe," she said. "We will help you." The man's eyes darted between her and the others. The words were not fully understood, yet the tone conveyed meaning. Relief washed over him in a quiet wave. He nodded slowly, too exhausted to speak, but grateful for the gesture. For the first time in days, he felt a spark of hope that he might survive the desert after all. The women moved carefully, surrounding him at a respectful distance. They brought small items, water from a hidden pouch, pieces of dried food, and a blanket to shield him from the setting sun. The man, still cautious but increasingly aware of their kindness, accepted their help with trembling hands. He drank the water slowly, savoring each sip as if it were a gift from the heavens. The food nourished his weary body, giving him strength he had thought lost forever. As they sat together, the sun setting behind the distant dunes, the man began to feel a sense of connection he had not known in days. These women, who had at first appeared mysterious and even frightening, had become his lifeline. The desert, which had seemed endless and merciless, now felt less threatening, tempered by the presence of those who understood it and him. The boundaries between fear and trust, stranger and friend, began to blur. That evening, as the shadows lengthened and the desert cooled, the man rested while the women kept watch. They spoke softly among themselves, observing him carefully, ensuring he was not too weak or dehydrated. The desert night was quiet, the only sounds the gentle whisper of wind over sand and the distant call of nocturnal creatures. The man slept lightly, comforted by the knowledge that he was not alone. The women, too, remained vigilant, understanding the delicate balance between danger and trust in the desert. In the first encounter, fear had given way to cautious understanding. Misunderstanding had begun to dissolve, replaced by empathy, care, and the slow formation of trust. The man, who had wandered lost and nearly defeated, now found hope in the presence of those who had once watched him from a distance. And the women, who had feared the unknown, discovered that courage and compassion could overcome the strangest appearances in the harshest of places. The first night in the desert had been long, but not as unbearable as the man had expected. Surrounded by the Apache women, he felt a cautious sense of safety. Their presence, though quiet and respectful, had a calming effect on him. They had provided water, a small amount of food, and a blanket to shield him from the night chill. For the first time in days, he could rest without the fear that each rustle or shadow might be the end. As dawn approached, the desert began to glow in soft shades of gold and pink. The man stirred, stretching his aching muscles and opening his eyes to see the women already awake, tending to their morning tasks. They moved gracefully, collecting herbs and checking their small traps for food. Their movements were efficient, practiced, and careful, and they seemed perfectly at home in this harsh environment. Watching them, the man realized how much he had taken for granted in the outside world: food, water, safety. Here, survival was a constant effort, and every small action carried weight. The eldest woman noticed him watching and approached slowly. "You must eat," she said, her tone gentle but firm. "Your body needs strength to walk in this desert." She handed him a small bundle of dried fruit and bread, which he accepted with trembling hands. The food tasted foreign, yet nourishing. As he ate, he felt his energy slowly returning, the exhaustion from the previous day beginning to ease. He glanced up at the women, realizing that they had saved him from what could have been a fatal day in the desert. Once he had eaten, the eldest woman gestured for him to follow. "There is a place nearby where you can rest and recover further," she explained. The man nodded, grateful for guidance. He did not fully understand her words, but her gestures, combined with the kindness in her eyes, made it clear that he was being offered a safe path forward. Slowly, he rose to his feet, careful not to stumble, and began to walk with them. Each step felt lighter than before, bolstered by the small meal and the knowledge that he was not alone. As they walked, the man began to observe the women more closely. Their clothing was simple yet practical, designed for comfort and movement in the desert. Their hands were strong and skilled, capable of tending to plants, catching small animals, and navigating the rough terrain with ease. The women spoke quietly among themselves, their language unfamiliar to him, yet the tone carried warmth and understanding. He felt a deep sense of admiration for their skill and resilience. They lived fully in this land, attuned to its rhythms and dangers, and he marveled at how natural they seemed here, compared to his own struggles to survive even a single day. At a small clearing, the women paused. The eldest woman gestured for him to sit and rest while she prepared water from a hidden pouch. The man crouched on the sand, feeling the warmth of the desert floor beneath him. He was still weak, his body worn from the previous day's struggle, but each small act of care from the women restored a bit of his strength. He drank the water slowly, savoring each sip, and allowed himself to feel gratitude without shame. For the first time, he realized that he had not been entirely alone, that there were people in the world willing to help a stranger in need. The younger women gathered small herbs and fruits from the surrounding area, placing them near him with careful hands. Though he did not know what each item was for, he sensed that they were meant to aid him, to heal and nourish. He reached out tentatively, touching the leaves and fruit, and felt a connection forming. It was not just physical sustenance they were providing, but emotional support, a reminder that he was still human, still capable of trust, and not entirely lost in the vast, indifferent desert. Hours passed, and the man's strength slowly returned. He moved with more confidence, walking beside the women rather than behind them. Though the language barrier remained, gestures and expressions communicated understanding. The women smiled occasionally, nodded in encouragement, and ensured he kept pace without overexerting himself. The desert, once a place of danger and fear, now felt slightly less hostile. With their guidance, he began to recognize patterns in the sand, signs of water hidden in cacti, and the small tracks of animals that could provide sustenance. As the day wore on, the man began to speak, slowly and haltingly. He pointed to his lips, then to the water the women had given him, trying to communicate his gratitude. The eldest woman smiled, nodding, understanding his intention even without words. She repeated gestures that made it clear they shared a mutual understanding. He was alive, they had helped him, and together they could survive the desert. This silent exchange deepened the trust between them, each act of communication a bridge across the gap of language and culture. By late afternoon, the group reached a small area sheltered by rocks, where the women often rested. It was a modest space, with soft sand for sitting and a few natural formations providing shade. Here, the man finally felt a sense of stability. He could rest properly, recover fully, and prepare for the days ahead. The women, sensing his need for peace, allowed him space while continuing their daily routines nearby. The desert's harshness had not disappeared, but with these companions it seemed more manageable. Over the next few hours, the man began to regain some of his normal strength. He practiced small movements, stretching his arms and legs, feeling the relief of blood moving through tired muscles. He experimented with the water and herbs the women had given him, discovering which combinations refreshed him most. Slowly he began to understand their care, recognizing the patterns of their actions as intentional and thoughtful rather than random. Each gesture became a lesson in patience, observation, and survival. The women, in turn, observed him carefully. They watched how he handled the water, how he moved in the sand, and how he reacted to the sun's glare. They noticed small details, the way his hands trembled when he reached for water, the cautious steps he took over uneven ground, and the expressions of relief and gratitude that passed over his face. These observations helped them plan how to guide him further, ensuring he could move safely without overexerting himself. They understood that trust had to grow slowly, and that the man's well-being depended on their careful attention. As evening approached, the desert took on a different character. The sun's rays softened, turning the sand and rocks into shades of red, gold, and purple. Shadows lengthened, creating pockets of cooler air. The man, feeling stronger, began to walk a little farther from the shaded area, testing his endurance. The women followed, staying close enough to intervene if necessary, but giving him space to regain confidence in his movements. For the first time since his arrival in the desert, he felt capable of moving independently, aware that he was not alone but also not completely dependent. Night fell again, and with it came a quiet peace. The desert, which had seemed so threatening and merciless, now offered a different kind of beauty. Stars blanketed the sky, shining brightly in the clear desert air. The man lay on the sand, feeling a calmness he had not experienced for days. The women gathered nearby, keeping watch and preparing a small fire for warmth. The crackle of the flames and the soft glow created a sense of safety, a stark contrast to the fear and isolation of the previous days. In that moment, the man realized that survival was not just about finding food and water. It was about connection, understanding, and trust. The women had not only provided sustenance but had offered a form of guidance, teaching him how to move, how to observe, and how to respect the desert's power. Through their patience and care, he began to see a way forward, a chance to endure the harshness of the environment without losing hope or humanity. By the end of the night, the man felt a profound sense of gratitude. He understood that these women had changed the course of his journey, transforming what could have been a story of suffering into one of resilience and support. They had bridged the gap between fear and trust, between stranger and friend, showing that compassion could flourish even in the most unforgiving places. The desert morning broke in soft shades of gold and pink, spilling light across the sand and rocks. The man awoke feeling stronger than he had in days. His muscles were still sore, and his body ached from the harsh journey, but he no longer felt the crushing exhaustion that had threatened to overwhelm him. The presence of the Apache women had given him more than just physical aid. They had given him hope, and that hope had renewed his spirit. He rose slowly, stretching his arms and legs, careful not to overexert himself. The women were already awake, moving quietly through the small clearing where they had spent the night. Their gestures were practiced and efficient, tending to their daily tasks while remaining aware of his presence. The man watched them, noticing details he had missed before. The way their hands moved with skill and precision, how their eyes scanned the horizon as if reading the desert itself, and the gentle, unspoken communication between them. Each small observation deepened his respect and admiration for their knowledge and courage. After a short while, the eldest woman approached him. Her face held a gentle smile, one that carried reassurance without words. She gestured toward the horizon, then to him, encouraging him to continue the journey with their guidance. The man nodded, understanding the invitation. Though he did not yet know the language fully, the tone of her voice, the calm certainty in her eyes, and the patient gestures made the meaning clear. For the first time, he felt that he was not merely surviving the desert. He was learning to navigate it alongside allies who cared for him. They began to move together, the women leading the way and the man following. The desert, which had once seemed vast and threatening, now felt more manageable. Each step was measured, but with growing confidence. He noticed small details in the landscape that he had previously overlooked. A cluster of cacti with thick, juicy stems that could provide water, the faint tracks of animals moving through the sand, and small patches of shade cast by rocks that offered temporary respite from the sun. The women pointed to these features, guiding him in subtle ways, teaching him how to read the land without overwhelming him. The man spoke cautiously, testing his words in their presence. He pointed to the water they had given him, then to himself, trying to express his gratitude. One of the younger women smiled and nodded, her gestures conveying understanding. Though he could not yet form full sentences in their language, the exchange was meaningful. They were communicating without relying entirely on words, through actions, expressions, and shared understanding. Slowly, the man began to feel part of a rhythm, a silent conversation with these strangers who had become his guides. Hours passed, and they reached a small oasis hidden among rocks and low hills. The water was clear and refreshing, and the man knelt to drink, feeling relief spread through his body. The women had known of this place, and their guidance had led him to it safely. He marveled at their knowledge of the desert and the care they had taken to bring him here without startling or overwhelming him. For the first time, he felt a sense of security, a rare sensation in a land that had previously offered only challenges and dangers. As the day progressed, the man's confidence grew. He began to walk more steadily, his steps firmer, and he experimented with small tasks. The women showed him how to gather edible herbs and small fruits, how to recognize signs of water hidden in rocks or plants, and how to move efficiently to conserve energy. Each lesson, though simple, was invaluable. They were not just aiding his survival, they were teaching him to live in the desert, to read its signs, and to respect its power. The man began to speak more often, combining gestures and words as he attempted to explain his journey and experiences. The women listened patiently, nodding and smiling at his efforts. Through these exchanges, a deeper understanding formed. Misunderstandings from the first encounter faded completely. The man realized that these women had never intended to harm him. Their caution had been a reflection of their wisdom and survival instincts. And the women, in turn, saw him not as a strange creature or threat, but as a human being with his own story, struggles, and resilience. By mid-afternoon, they reached a higher plateau that offered a panoramic view of the desert. The man paused to take in the scenery. The dunes stretched endlessly, shimmering under the sun, interspersed with rocks and patches of vegetation. The wind whispered softly through the sand, carrying the faint scent of herbs and desert flowers. For the first time, he saw the desert not as an enemy, but as a living, breathing landscape, full of beauty, challenge, and lessons. He glanced at the women, gratitude shining in his eyes. They had changed his perception, transforming fear into knowledge, isolation into companionship. The eldest woman gestured toward the man and then to the sky, indicating the need to rest. They settled among the rocks, sharing shade and small portions of food and water. The man felt a profound sense of connection, not just with the women, but with the desert itself. He understood that survival was not merely about endurance, but about observation, adaptation, and trust. The women had taught him that without saying it directly, and he carried that lesson deep within him. As the sun began to set, painting the desert in warm hues of orange, red, and purple, the man reflected on his journey. He remembered the fear and exhaustion of the first day, the moments when he had thought he might not survive. He thought of the women watching from a distance, their careful observation, and the first cautious steps they had taken toward him. He realized how far he had come, not just physically, but emotionally. He had learned trust, patience, and the importance of empathy, and he had been reminded of the kindness that can exist even in the harshest of environments. Night fell once more, bringing a cool calm to the desert. Stars blanketed the sky, twinkling like distant beacons. The man lay on the soft sand, feeling a quiet peace he had not known for days. The women kept watch nearby, their presence reassuring. The fire they had built crackled gently, casting a warm glow over the group. In that moment, the desert felt less intimidating, transformed from a place of fear into a space of shared experience and understanding. The man realized that the journey had changed him. He had entered the desert alone, weary, vulnerable, and desperate. Now he was stronger, wiser, and more connected to the world around him. He had learned that survival was not merely about physical endurance, but also about recognizing opportunities for help, understanding the intentions of others, and embracing guidance when offered. The women had taught him that trust and empathy could flourish even in the most unlikely of places. Over the next few days, the man and the women continued their journey together. He learned more about their ways, their knowledge of the desert, and the simple wisdom that guided their lives. He began to feel a sense of belonging, not as an outsider, but as someone welcomed and protected. The women, in turn, grew to trust him more, seeing his efforts to learn, adapt, and respect the land. Together, they navigated the desert, each step a blend of caution, skill, and shared understanding. Eventually, the man realized that the desert, once a place of fear and isolation, had become a teacher and a space of transformation. He no longer saw it as an enemy, but as a landscape full of lessons, beauty, and life. And he knew that the kindness and patience of the Apache women had been the key to that transformation. Without their guidance, he might never have survived. With it, he had learned not only to endure, but to appreciate, to observe, and to respect the world around him. By the final night of their journey together, the man felt a deep sense of gratitude and connection. He knew that the desert would always be part of him, a reminder of both vulnerability and resilience. And he knew that the women had changed his life, teaching him that compassion, patience, and understanding could bridge even the widest gaps between strangers. As they rested beneath the stars, the man reflected quietly on the journey that had begun with fear and misunderstanding, and had ended in trust, respect, and survival. He had entered the desert alone, unsure of his fate, and now he was connected to the women, to the land, and to the lessons of patience and kindness that would stay with him forever. The desert, once a symbol of challenge and threat, had become a space of growth, understanding, and quiet triumph. In the morning, when the sun rose again, the man would continue his journey with newfound confidence, strengthened by the care of the women who had watched over him. But he would carry more than just the skills for survival. He would carry the memory of their kindness, the lessons of trust, and the understanding that even in the harshest environments, compassion could shine brighter than fear. The desert had tested him, but it had also taught him the most important lesson of all, that even strangers could become allies, and even the harshest lands could foster connection, trust, and hope.